Taylor Marie Jensen stood at the altar, the intricate lace of her dress catching the golden light. Her heart fluttered with a quiet, certain joy. Across from her, Mark Edward Carter, her first and only love, smiled. His eyes, the warm, comforting brown of a well-worn book, held a universe of promise and shared memories. This was it. This was her happily ever after, the life she had planned since she was 12 years old, unfolding exactly as it should. "Do you, Taylor Marie Jensen?" The officiant's voice was a gentle, melodic hum. "Take Mark Edward Carter to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward?" Taylor's voice, though a little shaky from the emotion, was clear and unwavering. "I do." A collective sigh of happiness rippled through the rows of guests. Family, friends, neighbors. Her best friend Jessica, standing beside her as maid of honor, squeezed her hand. Mark squeezed hers back, his thumb rubbing a slow, reassuring circle on her palm. He leaned in, his voice a low, tender whisper meant only for her. "Soon, my love." Just as the officiant began to turn to Mark, it happened. Not with a shout or a gasp, but with a sound that seemed to come from the very ground beneath their feet. A deep, guttural growl that vibrated through the patio stones and silenced the chatter in an instant. It was a sound of primal power, of wildness unbound. Every head turned. The hum of conversation died, replaced by a nervous, confused hush. Through the arch of climbing roses, where the path to the ceremony began, a man strode into view. He wasn't walking so much as commanding the space. He was immense, a wall of pure muscle wrapped in a simple black suit jacket that seemed to strain at the seams. His dark hair was just a little too long, his jaw a little too set, and his eyes were not human. They were the color of molten gold, burning with an intensity that seemed to see right through the delicate facade of the wedding and into the very core of the earth. He didn't acknowledge a single guest. His gaze was fixed, a laser beam cutting a path directly to Taylor. He moved with a predator's grace, his strides long and purposeful. The air crackled with a powerful, unseen energy. A few guests mumbled, a few more gasped, and a sense of unease settled over the perfect garden party. He stopped just a few feet from the altar, a force of nature blocking out the sun. His presence was so overwhelmingly foreign, so wild, it felt like a cold front had just swept through the warm, gentle air. Mark, ever the protector, stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving to shield Taylor. "Who are you?" Mark's voice was tense, strained. "You're interrupting my wedding." A low, humorless snarl curled the stranger's full lips. His gaze never left Taylor's face. "This is no longer your wedding, human. This is a claiming." The words were a direct hit. A bomb detonated in the middle of her carefully constructed life. Taylor's blood ran cold. She didn't know this man. She had never seen those terrifying golden eyes, had never heard that deep, commanding voice. And yet, when he took a step closer, her body felt a jolt that was not of fear, but of pure, unadulterated shock. An electric current she had no name for. He reached out, his large, calloused hand moving with an agonizing slowness. It felt like an eternity before his fingertips brushed her cheek, and the touch was a paradox. It was scalding, burning her skin, but at the same time, it felt like coming home. It was the most intimate yet most terrifying contact she had ever experienced. "Mine," he whispered, the sound meant for her and her alone. The single word felt like a brand. His eyes, fixed on hers, seemed to glow even brighter, and the scent of him, pine, rain on asphalt, and something wildly untamed, filled her senses, pushing away the sweet smell of flowers. Taylor's mind raced, a frantic animal trapped in a corner. Who was this man? Was this a joke? A terrible, twisted prank? Mark was shouting something, but his voice sounded distant, muffled. The guests were standing now, a confused, frightened mob. Her father, a man who never raised his voice, was yelling at the stranger. The man ignored them all. He reached for her, his powerful arms wrapping around her waist. "No." Taylor cried out, a protest torn from her lungs. Put me down. What are you doing? I don't know you. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing. Her feet left the ground, her pristine white dress tangling around her legs, her beautiful delicate veil falling away and landing in a crumpled heap on the manicured lawn. The crowd erupted in a panicked roar. Jessica screamed her name. You barbarian. Who do you think you are? Taylor beat her fists against his solid chest, her heart hammering with a mixture of terror and white-hot fury. He ignored her struggle, his grip firm, unyielding. He walked with long, purposeful strides, carrying her away from the beautiful garden, the perfectly set tables and the loving crowd. Her last sight was Mark's face, a mask of pure devastation and helpless fury. He was reaching for her, his hand stretched out, but the strange, strong man was already moving too fast. The perfect ordinary day was over. Her dreams, her future, her perfectly crafted life, shattered into a million pieces by the unstoppable will of a man with golden eyes. He didn't slow down until they were in a clearing where a large black SUV was waiting. He opened the passenger door, unceremoniously placed her inside and slammed the door shut. He walked around to the driver's side, his movements a symphony of controlled power. Taylor's mind was reeling. She was still in her wedding dress, her hair half unpinned, her veil a forgotten piece of fabric on the grass far, far away. He got into the driver's seat, the car engine purring to life. He glanced at her, his golden eyes still burning with that strange intensity. Don't bother, he said, his voice a low growl. There's no signal out here. Taylor was hyperventilating, her vision blurring with tears. This couldn't be happening. This had to be a nightmare. She was going to wake up in her childhood bedroom and everything would be normal. But the cold leather of the car seat, the scent of pine and wildness, and the terrifying silent man beside her were all too real. Who are you? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Scott, he said, his eyes on the road ahead. And you are my mate. Now let's get you home. Home. The word was a knife in her heart. She had just been taken from her home, from her perfect life, by a stranger. The dream was over. The nightmare was just beginning. Chapter 1. The sun was a warm weight against her cheek. Taylor's eyes fluttered open, her mind still fuzzy with the remnants of a dream. A beautiful dream of a garden, of white lace and whispered vows. She inhaled, expecting the crisp, clean scent of the morning dew from her family's backyard. But instead her senses were assaulted by the rich, earthy smell of old wood, of pine needles, and of something wild like wet earth and a hidden beast. She sat up abruptly, the stiff, crumpled fabric of her wedding dress protesting with a rustle. The dream shattered. The reality was a punch to the gut. She was not in her suburban bedroom. She was in a large, unfamiliar room, one that felt more like a hunter's lodge than a house. The walls were made of dark, polished wood, the floor covered in a plush, shaggy rug that was clearly not synthetic. A huge stone fireplace dominated one wall, and across from her, a massive window looked out onto a dense, seemingly endless forest. The morning light filtered through the leaves, dappling the room in a serene, untroubled way that felt completely at odds with the frantic chaos in her mind. Taylor scrambled off the bed, her feet sinking into the rug, and stumbled to the window. She pressed her palms against the cool glass, her frantic gaze searching for any sign of a road, of another house, of anything familiar. There was nothing. Just trees. A sea of green stretching on forever. She was miles from anywhere she knew. Panic, cold and sharp, coiled in her stomach. She turned and ran to the heavy wooden door, her hands fumbling for a knob. It was a sturdy, old-fashioned handle, and when she turned it, it didn't budge. It wasn't locked. It was just impossibly heavy. She pushed with her shoulder, then with her full body weight, her cries of frustration muffled by the thick wood. He had to get out. He had to get back to Mark. Back to her wedding. Back to her life. Just as a fresh wave of tears began to blur her vision, the door swung open with a soft sigh of ancient wood. And there he was, Scott. He filled the doorway, his broad shoulders seeming to block out the light. He wore a simple gray t-shirt that stretched across his chest, and a pair of dark jeans that hugged his powerful legs. He smelled the same as he had the day before, pine, rain, and something that was just him. His golden eyes swept over her, taking in her crumpled wedding dress, her tear-streaked face, and her disheveled hair. A flicker of something that looked like concern or maybe just confusion crossed his features. "You're awake," he stated, his voice a low rumble that made the air feel thick. "You've been asleep for a long time." The calm, controlled tone was the final straw. Taylor's frustration boiled over into a white-hot rage. "Don't you dare act like this is normal," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You kidnapped me. You ruined my wedding. Do you have any idea what you've done?" He stepped fully into the room, his expression unreadable. "I claimed my mate. I did what I had to do." "Claimed your mate?" She spat the word like a poison. "I don't know you. I'm getting married. I love Mark. He's the man I chose." Scott's jaw tightened. "The mate bond is sacred. It's not a choice. It's destiny." "Destiny." Taylor let out a short, incredulous laugh that was half a sob. "My destiny was marrying the man I've loved my entire life. Not being kidnapped by some overgrown wolfman." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Scott stood there still, and Taylor realized her words had struck a nerve. He wasn't just big, he was powerful in a way she couldn't understand. She saw a flash of anger in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a profound bewilderment. He truly didn't understand her. The concept of her rejecting him was entirely foreign. He took a slow step towards her and she instinctively recoiled. "Taylor, I know this is a lot to process, but you're safe here. You're my mate. My pack will protect you." "Your pack?" she repeated, her voice rising again. "I don't want your protection. I want to go home. To my family. To Mark." She reached for a glass on the bedside table and with a shaky hand threw it at the wall, where it shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. "I hate you." Scott didn't flinch. He just watched the glass fall, his expression a mixture of surprise and genuine bafflement. He was an alpha. He was used to respect, to instant obedience, to being a figure of awe. Taylor's visceral human fury was a completely new and alien experience. He didn't know what to do with it. He finally spoke, his voice quiet. "I can't let you leave." "Then I'll find a way out," she promised, her chin jutting out in defiance. She marched over to a window, her mind racing. It was too high to jump from without getting hurt. She looked around the room. A lamp. It was too heavy. A chair. She couldn't lift it. She was a wedding planner from the suburbs, not an action hero. Her attempts to find a weapon or an escape were clumsy and futile. "Wait a moment," a new voice said from the doorway. Taylor spun around. A young man with bright, mischievous eyes and a sandy mop of hair stood just behind Scott, holding a plate with a muffin and a cup of what smelled like coffee. He was in a comfortable hoodie and jeans. He looked like any college kid. "She's a feisty one, Alpha," he said, a grin playing on his lips. "Didn't think a human could have so much bite." "Oscar," Scott said, his tone a clear warning. The young man, Oscar, just shrugged. "What?" "It's true. Most mates are happy to be found. But you get the one who wants to throw things and escape. You've got your work cut out for you." Scott turned to him, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Give me a moment, Oscar." Oscar didn't move. "I've got the Alpha King on the phone, Alpha. Said he wanted to talk to you about the situation." He looked pointedly at Taylor. Scott's shoulders slumped in what looked like a sigh of exasperation. He finally nodded. "Fine. But wait for me outside the door." Oscar just gave Taylor a wink and backed out of the room. Scott turned back to her, and the brief window of humor slammed shut. "Taylor, I've already spoken with your family," he said, his voice flat. Taylor's heart leaped. Hope, pure and beautiful, surged through her veins. "They know where I am?" Scott shook his head. No. I told them you needed some time away. That you were overstressed from the wedding planning and needed to take a break. That your phone would be off for a little while. The hope died, replaced by a cold, numbing horror. You what? It was for the best, he said, as if it was the most logical thing in the world. Humans don't understand our world. The less they know, the safer they are. I made up a story about you coming to our family's secluded cabin. It sounded plausible. Plausible? Taylor's voice was a low, dangerous whisper. You just lied to my parents? To Mark? You cut me off from my entire life. Her fingers fumbled for her phone in the pocket of her dress, her desperation a hot, ugly thing. She pulled it out, her hands shaking, and stared at the screen. No signal. She knew Scott had said that, but seeing it for herself was a fresh, agonizing pain. He tried again and again. Nothing. She was a million miles from home with no way to call for help. No way to tell Mark she was okay. She was completely and utterly trapped. Tears, hot and angry, streamed down her cheeks. The furious energy of a moment ago was gone, replaced by a hollow, gut-wrenching despair. She sank to the floor, her legs no longer able to support her. The crumpled lace of her dress was no longer a symbol of love and hope. It was a winding sheet. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed, deep, shuddering sobs of loss and fear. Scott stood over her, his golden eyes filled with an alien, helpless pity. He wasn't used to seeing such raw human despair. He wanted to touch her, to comfort her, but he knew any attempt would likely make things worse. He had claimed her, and to him, that was the ultimate act of love and protection. He had no idea how to explain that to a human who only saw him as a monster who had stolen her future. He was an alpha of a powerful pack, used to solving problems with a show of force or a few decisive words. Taylor's shattered emotions were a territory he had no map for. He stood there for a long time, the silence broken only by her ragged breathing and the occasional sob. Finally he turned and left, closing the heavy wooden door behind him. The lock clicked into place. Taylor heard it, and her final shred of hope evaporated. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, stolen from the life she loved by a man who couldn't understand that his sacred bond was her worst nightmare. She was an unchosen mate, and her battle had just begun. Chapter 2. The sun was higher when Taylor finally stirred, her eyes swollen and gritty from hours of exhausted, tearful sleep. The wedding dress, once a symbol of her beautiful future, felt like a shroud. She sat up slowly, the silence in the room heavy and oppressive. The lock she had heard click into place the night before felt like a tangible weight on her soul. He was a captive. He was a prisoner. The furious despair of the night before had settled into a cold, hard resentment. She slipped out of the bed, the lace of the dress a tangled mess at her feet. She had to get out of this ridiculous outfit. It was a constant, mocking reminder of what she had lost. On a chair by the door, a stack of clothes had been left. A pair of well-worn jeans, a soft gray flannel shirt, and a pair of sturdy hiking boots. A single, silent message from her captor. "This is your life now." A fresh wave of anger pulsed through her veins. She was not a hiker. She was a woman who owned 37 pairs of shoes and whose idea of a good time was brunch with her best friend, not exploring the wilderness. She considered ignoring the clothes, but the dress was suffocating and the need for a shower was overwhelming. With a defiant sniff, she stripped off the wedding dress and stepped into a luxurious bathroom she hadn't noticed the night before. The shower felt like a baptism, washing away the dirt and grime of the previous day, but doing nothing to cleanse the ache in her heart. She dried off, pulled on the jeans and flannel, and found they fit with an unnerving perfection. It was a little too warm for flannel, but it was better than the wedding dress. She sat on the edge of the bed and felt the silence of the large house. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a listening one. A soft knock came at the door and then it opened without her consent. A woman stood in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. She was tall and slender, with striking features and dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. Her eyes, a sharp, assessing blue, took Taylor in from head to toe. Her expression was guarded but not hostile. "Alpha wants you to come down for breakfast," the woman said, her voice surprisingly soft for a person who radiated so much toughness. "I'm Lena. His beta." Taylor narrowed her eyes. "Beta? Like, second in command? What is this, some kind of weird commune?" Lena's lips twitched slightly, but she didn't smile. "Something like that. Come on. I'm not going to hurt you." "No," Taylor said, her voice firm. "I'm not a dog on a leash. I'm not coming down." A flash of something akin to pity, but also a hint of frustration, crossed Lena's face. "You don't have a choice. The sooner you get that, the easier this will be for everyone." The simple, blunt honesty was a slap in the face. Taylor glared at her, but Lena just stood there, unmoving, radiating a quiet, unwavering authority that made her seem more formidable than Scott himself. Taylor finally let out a frustrated sigh, knowing she couldn't win this battle. She slowly rose and followed Lena down a long, winding staircase into a sprawling main living area. The space was massive, with high ceilings and huge windows looking out over the forest. A fire crackled in a hearth that was the size of a small car. In a large, open-plan kitchen area, several people were milling about, laughing and talking in low tones. The air was filled with the savory smell of bacon and eggs. Scott was at a long dining table talking to a man who was clearly his father, a regal-looking older man with silver hair and the same golden eyes. When Scott saw Taylor, his conversation stopped mid-sentence. His gaze softened for a fleeting moment, a flicker of relief passing through his eyes that she had finally come down. But then his expression hardened, as if remembering her fiery reaction from the night before. "Morning, Taylor," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Taylor ignored him, her eyes scanning the room. She noticed how the other pack members watched her, their expressions a mix of curiosity, suspicion, and what looked like awe. They were all so vibrant, so full of an energy that made her feel pale and small in comparison. Lena handed her a plate of eggs and bacon. As Taylor took it, a young man with a crooked smile and a mess of sandy brown hair approached. It was Oscar from the night before. He didn't look at her, but his voice was a playful whisper. "Don't mind the stares. It's not every day we get a human Luna. And a feisty one at that." Taylor shot him a furious glare. He just winked at her. She sat down at the table as far away from Scott as she could get and picked at her food. She felt 100 eyes on her, and the thought of her family, of Mark, consumed her. Her chest ached with a deep, hollow emptiness. After breakfast, Scott approached her. "I want to show you the territory." "I don't want to see your territory," she said, her voice flat and low. "It's important that you understand our home," he insisted, his tone brooking no argument. He led her out a back door into a vast, sprawling landscape. He showed her the training grounds, a large clearing where several young men and women were engaged in what looked like a cross between wrestling and a brutal game of tag. He pointed out the communal gardens where they grew their own vegetables. He explained the boundaries of their territory, invisible lines in the forest that were marked by a scent only they could smell. "This is the main house," he said, gesturing to the rustic, beautiful structure. "There are other houses for the pack members spread out through the territory. We're a family, Taylor. We work together, we protect each other." Taylor looked around at the pristine, wild beauty of the place and felt a profound sense of wrongness. This isn't a family. It's a cult. Scott flinched as if she had physically struck him. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his golden eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and frustration. "A cult? We are a pack. We're 1,000 years of tradition and instinct. It's who we are." "It's who you are," she retorted, her voice rising. "Not me. I am a human woman with a normal life. You ripped me out of it." The argument hung in the air, a familiar, tense silence. To change the subject, Scott led her to a part of the forest with a fast-moving stream and a clearing filled with wildflowers. "This is a sacred place for us," he said, his voice softer, but she was too angry to care. "Oh, is it?" she said sarcastically. "Do you guys howl at the moon and do weird rituals in a circle?" She was baiting him, trying to get a rise out of him. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. He didn't understand her sarcasm. Just then Oscar and Lena emerged from the trees, jogging towards them. Oscar was out of breath and laughing. He came to a stop in front of Taylor, his grin wide. "Alpha, Lena tells me you haven't initiated her into the pack yet," he said. "Initiated?" Taylor asked warily. Oscar's grin widened. "It's a tradition for a new mate. You have to sniff your alpha's scent so you know who to follow." Before she could process the words, Oscar leaned over, sniffed Scott's shoulder, and gave an exaggerated sigh of contentment. He then gestured for her to do the same. Taylor stared at him dumbfounded. "You want me to sniff him? Like a dog?" "It's not so bad," Oscar said with a wink. "It's a sign of loyalty and acceptance." Taylor looked at Lena, who was trying and failing to suppress a smile. It was a prank. A ridiculous, bizarre prank. "I am not sniffing him," Taylor said, her voice full of disdain. Scott, however, was clearly confused. He looked at Oscar, then at Taylor, trying to figure out the joke. "Oscar, that's not an actual tradition. You're lying to her." Oscar just shrugged. "A little fun. She needs to loosen up." Scott shot a glare at his pack member. "Don't prank her. This is serious." As the three of them argued, Taylor's eyes wandered to the edge of the clearing. A large, gray blur moved silently through the trees. It was a wolf. A massive, sleek, silent creature. It had to be 3 feet tall at the shoulder, its fur a beautiful mix of dark grays and blacks. The wolf stopped and looked at her, its head tilted slightly. Its eyes, even from a distance, were dark and intelligent. Taylor froze, a gasp caught in her throat. She had read about wolves, seen pictures, but this was different. This was not a zoo animal. This was a force of nature, a creature of pure power and instinct. She felt an ancient, primal fear, a fear that was hardwired into every human. The wolf didn't look away. For a moment, it felt like an eternity. They just stared at each other. Then, with a fluid, silent motion, it disappeared back into the trees. Taylor turned back to Scott and the others, her face pale. He finally understood. They weren't just men who lived in the woods. They were something else. Something wild, powerful, and terrifying. Her world, her human world of reason and logic and small-town sensibilities, was gone. She was in a world of beasts and primal instincts, and she was completely, hopelessly alone. The realization was a cold, hard stone in the pit of her stomach. There was no going back. She reached for her pocket, her fingers brushing against the cold plastic of her phone. She pulled it out, stared at the dead screen, and felt a sob rise in her throat. She looked at the Alpha, the man who had stolen her life, and for the first time she wasn't just angry. She was terrified. Chapter 3. The days blurred into a monotonous, frustrating cycle. Taylor's routine was a silent, defiant protest. She woke up, dressed in the practical, boring clothes provided, and came down for breakfast only to avoid Lena's quiet authority. She ate her food, ignored Scott, and then spent the rest of the day in her room, reading the book Scott had brought for her, or simply staring out the window at the relentless green world outside. The silence of the forest was a living thing, a constant reminder of how far she was from the city sounds, from traffic and sirens and the comforting hum of air conditioning. Scott, however, was not one to be ignored. He was trying to win her over. But his methods were so profoundly out of touch with her world that they were almost comical. The first morning after her breakdown, he showed up at her door with a bouquet of wildflowers, their stems still wet with dew. He held them out to her, a gesture that was meant to be tender. "For you," he said, his voice a low rumble. Taylor stared at the beautiful wildflowers and felt a lump of cold resentment in her throat. Mark had always brought her a single red rose. Who is their thing? Scott's gesture felt like a parody. They're nice, she said flatly. Do you want a vase? I'm sure there's one in a cabinet somewhere. Scott's brow furrowed. Vase? Just hold them. They're going to die, Scott, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. You pick a plant, you have to put it in water. That's how it works. He looked at the flowers in his hand as if he were seeing them for the first time. The concept of something needing to be cared for after it was plucked from the earth was new to him. He was a man of the wild, a man who hunted and lived off the land. Things either lived in the wild or they died. There was no in-between. He ended up leaving them on the table in her room, where they wilted into a sad brown mess in a matter of hours. Another morning he brought her a small, smooth river stone, a deep shade of black with a perfect white line running through it. This is a sign of good luck among my people, he explained, his golden eyes full of a hopeful earnestness. Taylor took the rock. It was beautiful, undeniably so. But it wasn't a diamond ring. It wasn't a promise. It was just a rock. Great, she said, her voice void of emotion. My very own pet rock. She placed it on a windowsill and turned away. Scott's shoulders slumped, his expression a mix of confusion and frustration. She saw the look in his eyes every time. It was the look of an alpha who had never had to work for anything he wanted. He had found his mate, the one person he was destined for, and she was rejecting him at every turn. He couldn't wrap his head around it. In his world, the mate bond was everything. It was a sacred, undeniable truth. To her, it was a terrifying lie. One afternoon he came to her door. I want to show you the heart of the territory. The place my family has held for generations. Taylor knew it was another attempt to awe her into submission. Her defiance, however, was a stubborn living thing. He saw her chance. He would be leading her away from the main house. He had to find a road, a sign, something. She nodded, a grim determination setting in. They walked for a long time, the only sounds the crunch of pine needles under their feet and the birds in the trees. Scott was a silent, powerful presence beside her. He moved with a grace that was both intimidating and mesmerizing. He pointed out different trees, explaining their uses. He showed her a clearing where their pack had held ceremonies for a century. He was trying to show her a history, a legacy. She was just looking for a way out. They came to a wide creek, its water rushing over smooth, moss-covered stones. A fallen tree, a massive oak, created a natural bridge to the other side. Scott crossed it with ease, his steps light and confident. He turned and extended a hand to her. Taylor looked at the hand, then at the water. The creek was wider than it looked and the moss was slick. She could fall. She could get hurt. But it was also her chance. She could run, get lost, and maybe, just maybe, find her way back. Don't be afraid, he said. I'll catch you. I'm not afraid, she lied, her voice shaky. She took a step onto the log. The moss was slippery beneath the soles of her hiking boots. She took another, then another. She was in the middle of the log, the ground a long way away, when she saw a glint in the water. A loose rock was lodged in the moss. She tried to step over it, but her foot slid and she lost her balance. She yelped, her arms flailing. She was going down. The cold, rushing water seemed to reach up for her. Then a blur of motion. In a heartbeat, Scott was there, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her back. His body was hard and solid against hers. The force of his pull was so strong it sent a jolt through her, an energy that was not just physical. It was a current, a recognition, an undeniable hum that resonated deep in her bones. She wasn't just being saved. She was being claimed again in a way that was more powerful than his words at the wedding. She gasped, not from fear of falling, but from the sudden, overwhelming sensation of his touch. He was holding her close, her back against his chest, her hair brushing his chin. The scent of pine and rain was everywhere, and it wasn't just a smell. It was an instinct, a beacon. He slowly, carefully helped her back to the shore. He let go of her, but his eyes, filled with a raw, protective intensity, never left her face. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. "You're shaking." Taylor felt the tremors running through her body. She was trembling, but it wasn't just from the near fall. It was from the way his touch had made her feel. Safe. Protected. And it terrified her. He hated him for it. She hated him for making her feel something so profoundly deep when her heart still belonged to Mark. "Don't touch me," she spat, her voice shaking with a fury that was born from her own confusion. She stumbled away from him towards a patch of sunlight. "I don't need you to save me. I don't need any of this." Scott looked baffled. He had done a good thing. He had saved her from falling. He had acted on instinct. He couldn't understand her rage. "Taylor, I don't understand," he said, his frustration finally breaking through his calm facade. "I saved you. You shouldn't have to," she cried, her voice cracking. "I shouldn't be here in the first place. I shouldn't have to rely on you for anything." She turned and ran, not with a plan this time, but with a desperate need to get away from him, from his touch, from the unsettling pull she had just felt. She ran until she was gasping for breath, until her lungs burned and her legs felt like lead. She collapsed on a patch of soft moss, her head in her hands. The tears came, but they were different this time. They were tears of pure, unadulterated fear. She wasn't just afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of herself. Of the way his touch had felt like a lightning strike. Of the way a part of her, a wild, secret part she never knew existed, had responded to his claim. She was caught between a life she desperately wanted to go back to and a destiny she was starting to realize might be as real and as terrifying as the man with the golden eyes who had just saved her life. She was an unchosen mate, and the bond, it seemed, was anything but breakable. Chapter 4. Taylor's rage, a cold, hard stone in her chest, had a new, sharp edge to it. The incident at the creek had done more than just reinforce her feelings of captivity. It had ignited a new, active defiance. If she couldn't escape physically, she would fight him emotionally. She would use her words like daggers, aiming to wound him in a way his brute strength couldn't protect him from. She would make him understand on a human level that he had stolen her heart, her soul, and her future, and that she would never willingly give them to him. She began her campaign of psychological warfare at the dinner table. When he asked her if she had enjoyed her walk, she replied, "It's hard to enjoy a walk when you're a prisoner." When he tried to talk about pack business, she would change the subject to her life with Mark. "Mark and I used to go to this great little Italian place every Tuesday. He always ordered the same thing, the lasagna. He's very consistent." The words were simple, but they were aimed to hit their mark. Scott would flinch, his eyes darkening with a mixture of confusion and frustration, and then he would go silent. He didn't understand the power of her human past. He was an alpha who lived in the present, whose life was all about instinct and action. Her quiet verbal torment was a concept he couldn't grasp. The pack members too noticed the change. The initial cautious curiosity had been replaced by a tense atmosphere. They were fiercely loyal to their alpha, and Taylor's open hostility was an affront. Lena would watch her with an expression of weary disapproval, and Oscar would sometimes just shake his head, a mix of pity and exasperation on his face. One evening, a large bonfire was lit in the central clearing. It was a pack gathering, a celebration of a successful hunt. The air was filled with the savory scent of roasting meat and the low, happy hum of conversation. Music, a mix of acoustic guitar and deep, resonant singing, filled the air. Taylor was in a foul mood. She wore a pair of Scott's old sweatpants and a hoodie, a deliberate choice to show her contempt for the celebration. She wanted no part of this wild world. She sat on a log, her arms wrapped around her knees, watching the pack members laugh and talk. They were so vibrant, so full of life, and she felt like a ghost in their midst. Scott was across the clearing, a natural magnet, the center of every conversation. His laughter was a deep, infectious sound that carried on the wind. Then she saw him. He was a human like her. He was talking to Lena, a notebook in his hand. He was in his late 20s with a friendly face and wire-rimmed glasses. Taylor learned later that his name was Dr. Ethan Miller, a wildlife specialist who consulted with the pack on environmental issues. He was a familiar face to them, a trusted human, and her heart did a strange little skip. A human. A man from her world. This was it. Her chance. Her opportunity to fight back on her own terms. She stood and, with a new determination in her stride, walked over to him. She pretended to be looking for a place to sit, and when she got close enough she caught his eye. "Excuse me," she said, her voice softer and more musical than it had been in weeks. "Is this spot taken?" Dr. Miller looked up from his notes, surprised. "Oh no. Please." She sat beside him, deliberately close enough that their shoulders brushed. She could feel Scott's eyes on her from across the clearing, the sense of his gaze a physical weight on her back. "Are you with the pack?" Dr. Miller asked, his tone professional. "In a way," Taylor said, a wry smile on her face. "My name's Taylor. I'm a guest." Dr. Miller smiled back, a genuine, friendly smile. "Ethan. It's nice to meet you. I don't see many other humans out here." "I'm sure," Taylor said, her eyes flicking to Scott. He was watching them now, his jaw set, his laughter gone. The air around them began to feel charged. Taylor turned her full attention to Ethan. She started to talk, laughing at his jokes, leaning in closer and even touching his arm once when she made a point. It was all a performance, a deliberate, calculated act to make Scott jealous. She talked about her life, about her career, about the things she missed. She painted a picture of a world that was everything his wasn't. "You know," she said, her voice a low murmur, "I'm not used to this kind of life. Back home my life was planned. My fiancé and I were going to buy a house, have a dog, a white picket fence." She let the sentence trail off, her eyes filled with mock sadness on Ethan's face. She could feel the temperature of the air dropping. The low hum of pack chatter seemed to quiet. Scott's voice, a low, dangerous growl, cut through the night like a knife. "Taylor." She ignored him, her performance for Ethan continuing. "I guess some people don't get to have a simple, happy life. Some people have it taken from them." The words were not for Ethan. They were for Scott. He was beside her in a heartbeat, his presence a physical storm. He placed a large, firm hand on her arm. He didn't say a word, he didn't have to. The possessive grip and the blazing intensity of his golden eyes spoke volumes. The crowd fell silent. "Excuse us," he said to Ethan, his voice a low, warning rumble. He pulled her to her feet and began to lead her away from the bonfire, towards the seclusion of the forest. She dug her heels in, refusing to be treated like an animal. "Let go of me. You can't just drag me away when I'm having a conversation." "You weren't having a conversation," he growled. "You were insulting me in front of my pack. And you were kidnapping me in front of all my friends. It's an interesting life, Alpha. I'm just living it," she yelled, her voice laced with venom. He stopped, his grip on her arm tightening, his face inches from hers. His golden eyes were blazing with a raw, primal fury. "He is not your mate. You're mine. You will not speak to another male like that. You will not flaunt your loyalty to another." "Loyalty? You want loyalty," she screeched, her voice cracking. "I am loyal to Mark. I am loyal to my family. I am loyal to my life. And you monster, you took all of it." Scott let out a guttural roar, a sound of pure rage and frustration that made the ground tremble. It was a sound that silenced every conversation, every whisper, every single noise in the clearing. It was the sound of an alpha's absolute, unbridled fury. He looked at her, his expression a mix of rage and baffled hurt. "He can't give you what I can. You can't deny this." He shoved her away from him, his hands letting go abruptly. Taylor stumbled back, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was seething, his chest heaving. She saw his hands clenching into fists, the veins standing out on his arms. He looked like he was about to shift, his human control slipping. For the first time she was truly terrified of his rage. She turned and ran, not back to the bonfire, but into the darkness of the forest, tears blurring her vision. She didn't stop until she was back in her room, the heavy door locked behind her. She collapsed on her bed, her body trembling with fear and adrenaline. She had pushed him and he had broken. A few minutes later there was a soft knock on her door. It was Lena. She came in, her expression unreadable. "You really shouldn't have done that," Lena said, her voice surprisingly soft. "It was an act of war." "It's not my fault he's a jealous brute," Taylor said, her voice thick with sobs. "He's not jealous," Lena corrected. "Not in the way you mean it. An alpha's claim is everything. It's a bond of loyalty, and when a mate flirts with someone else, it's not a game. It's a threat to his authority, to his very identity. It's like you were telling the entire pack you didn't trust him to lead you, to protect you." Lena sat on the edge of the bed, her face grim. "The bond, it's not just for you and him. It's for the pack. It's the promise of a future, of a new Luna, of the Alpha's bloodline. You're not just rejecting him. You're rejecting all of us. You're denying our future. That's why he reacted that way. You can't understand it because you're human. The bond is a truth. It's a pull that's so strong it overrides everything else. He was baffled you would choose a human with a white picket fence over a destiny that's been waiting for you for your entire life." Taylor looked at Lena, her mind reeling. She hadn't thought about it that way. She had just seen it as a fight between two people. Lena's words made it feel so much bigger. Scott wasn't just a man in love. He was an alpha with a responsibility to his pack. And she was standing in the way of it all. The mate bond, once just a terrifying concept, now felt like a living, breathing thing that was suffocating her, binding her to a life she never asked for. And she finally, terrifyingly, understood that her fight was not just with him. It was with a world she had just publicly rejected. Chapter 5. Taylor's days had settled into a sullen, tense pattern. After her public outburst at the bonfire, a new kind of silence had fallen over the pack. They had witnessed her brazen rejection of their alpha, and their caution around her had hardened into a quiet disapproval. She was a known variable now, a threat to the harmony of their unit, and they kept their distance. Scott, for his part, had stopped his clumsy attempts to win her over. He now treated her with a cold, distant politeness that was almost worse than his former possessiveness. He felt like a problem to be contained, not a person to be loved. The uneasy quiet was shattered one cool afternoon by a sound that made every pack member stop dead in their tracks. It wasn't a human sound, but a series of quick, sharp barks that cut through the forest like a siren. It was a pack alarm, a signal for danger. Taylor was sitting on the porch swing, and she watched in stunned silence as the calm, communal area exploded into motion. Pack members who had been laughing and talking just moments before were now running with a single-minded purpose towards the edge of the territory. Scott was there in an instant, his voice a low, commanding rumble as he gave orders. His father, the old alpha, stood beside him, his gaze focused and grim. Lena was already in motion, her face a mask of determination. Taylor watched as the other pack members fell into a formation, their movements so coordinated and fluid they were almost a single being. There was no panic, only a grim, urgent purpose. Taylor stood up, her heart hammering. "What's happening?" she asked, but no one heard her. They were gone. Scott had disappeared with the rest, a powerful, commanding figure at the head of a charge. She was left alone in the now silent clearing. Curiosity, a powerful and dangerous thing, overcame her fear. She couldn't just sit there and wait. She had to know what was happening. She slipped off the porch and followed the path the others had taken, her heart thumping against her ribs. She didn't get far before she heard a low, agonized whimper, followed by a sharp, commanding growl. She moved closer, slipping behind a thick pine tree, her body hidden from view. The scene that unfolded was a raw, terrifying glimpse into their world. 2 pack members were on the ground, Their bodies slumped against each other, blood staining the forest floor. They were both holding a small boy no older than 5 who was crying, his little leg twisted at a horrifying angle. Across the clearing, Scott was snarling, his body tense, his eyes blazing. He was standing over the body of a huge mangy wolf. A rogue. The animal was dead, its neck broken. But Scott wasn't looking at the rogue. He was looking at his 2 injured pack members and the terrified child. He dropped to his knees, his face full of a profound grief and concern. "Mason," he barked, his voice filled with an urgency that Taylor had never heard before. "Mason, stay with us. Lena, get the healers." Lena, who was already at their side, was working quickly, her hands pressing against the wounds of a man Taylor had seen at the dining table just that morning. Scott, his hands stained with blood, was cradling the boy, whispering to him in a language Taylor didn't understand. A low, soothing sound that seemed to calm the child instantly. Taylor watched, her heart a cold, tight knot in her chest. She had called him a monster, a barbarian, but what she was seeing now was not a monster. He was a leader, a protector. He was not just a powerful man. He was a man with a profound sense of duty and a deep, abiding love for his people. The raw concern on his face as he looked at the injured boy was a stark contrast to the casual indifference she had accused him of. She had seen him as a simple brute, but he was a man who carried the weight of an entire pack on his shoulders. The healers arrived, and the clearing, which had been silent, was now filled with low whispers and sounds of healing. Taylor watched as a woman placed her hands on the boy's twisted leg, and a soft, white glow emanated from her hands. The boy's crying subsided, and a few moments later he was sitting up, his leg completely healed. The 2 injured adults were also being attended to, and their wounds, which had looked so gruesome, were already closing, leaving nothing but faint red lines on their skin. The magic was real. The healers were real. Taylor turned and ran back to her room, her mind reeling. She collapsed on her bed, her heart still hammering in her chest. She had witnessed a moment of pure, selfless leadership. She had seen Scott in his element, and she had to admit he was magnificent. The anger she had been clinging to for weeks began to feel less like a weapon and more like a flimsy shield. Later that evening, Scott came to her room. He looked exhausted. There was a faint smear of dried blood on his cheek and dark circles under his golden eyes. He didn't say anything, just stood in the doorway, his body tired and his gaze heavy. Is everyone okay?" Taylor asked, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded. "They'll be fine. Rogue wolves came too close to the territory. They were a threat to the kids. You killed it." He just nodded again, his eyes focused on something far away. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you go through all this?" He finally looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a raw, weary honesty that made her stomach clench. "It's my job. It's what I was born to do. I protect my people. Always." He paused, then added, his voice low and heavy, "The Alpha's burden is heavy, Taylor. It's not just about power. It's about being responsible for everyone. Their lives, their safety, their future. All of it rests on my shoulders." He left then, and Taylor was alone with his words. He had never said anything like that before. He had always been so confident, so sure of himself. But tonight he looked tired, burdened. She thought about his solitary life, the immense pressure he must be under, the weight of a 1,000-year-old tradition. She had been so focused on her own pain that she hadn't once considered his. A soft knock came at her door. It was Oscar. He came in, his usual mischievous grin replaced by a more sober expression. He held a plate with a sandwich and a glass of milk. "You didn't come down for dinner," he said simply. Taylor took the plate, her fingers brushing his. "Thanks. You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes," she said. "The healers, and Scott." "That's the thing about our Alpha," Oscar said, taking a seat on the floor against the wall. "He doesn't show it to just anyone. He carries the weight. He's the first one in the fight and the last one to rest. He can't show fear or weakness. Not ever. It's lonely at the top. The only person he can truly be himself with is his mate. Taylor's heart tightened. She thought of Scott's bewildered face at her wedding, his frustration at her rejection. She had seen his anger, his possessiveness, but she had never once considered the fear beneath it. The fear of being alone forever. He thought that with you he could finally let go, Oscar continued, his voice softer. He thought he finally found the one person who would understand him, who would share his burden. It must be confusing for him to be rejected by the one person he's meant to be with. Oscar stood and left, leaving her in the quiet room. Taylor looked down at the sandwich, her appetite gone. She looked at the door Scott had just walked through. She had called him a monster, but she had just seen him protect his pack with a fierce, unwavering love. She had called him a brute, but she had just seen the lonely, weary man behind the title. She had been so busy building her walls that she had never once looked out to see his. And as she sat there in the silence, she felt a new, unfamiliar emotion stirring within her. It was not love, not yet. But it was a profound, quiet shift. A glimmer of a man behind the alpha, and a profound, sad realization that her life with Mark, perfect as it was, had never prepared her for a love that carried the weight of the world. Chapter 6. The fragile truce between Taylor and the pack was shattered one afternoon by an unexpected conversation she overheard. She was in the kitchen helping Lena with some mundane chores, a small, quiet way of trying to find some normalcy in this strange world. Lena was on a call, her voice low and serious. Taylor caught a few words. Mark. Private investigators. Family is worried. Taylor froze, the bowl she was holding still in her hands. The world seemed to stop spinning. Mark. Her Mark. He hadn't just given up. He was looking for her. The thought sent a jolt of electricity through her, a rush of hope so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. Her family. Her normal, human, loving family. They were worried, sick, searching for her, and she had been sitting here in this beautiful gilded cage, accepting her fate. The guilt was a physical weight, a cold, heavy stone in her stomach. She didn't wait. She found Scott in his office, a large rustic room filled with maps and books. He was bent over a large map of the territory, his brow furrowed in concentration. She burst in without knocking, her heart hammering against her ribs. You have to let me go, she said, her voice shaking with a desperate plea she hadn't felt since the first day. Scott looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and the familiar wariness he now held for her. Taylor, what's wrong? I just overheard Lena, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Mark? My family, they think I'm gone. They think I'm missing. You told me you took care of it, but they're out there looking for me. They're hurting. I can't let them suffer anymore. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a pleading whisper. Scott, I need to go home. I need to see them, to tell them I'm okay. To give them some peace. You're a leader. You're a protector. You saw what happened to that little boy. You understand what it's like to feel responsible for others. Please just think of them. Of Mark. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't fighting. She was pleading, a desperate human plea, appealing to the glimmer of a man she had seen behind the alpha in the last chapter. Scott's gaze softened. He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a profound sorrow. Taylor, you don't understand. This is my world. My claim is all they have to go on. If I let you go back, if you tell them what I am, what we are, it puts my entire pack in danger. I won't tell them, she promised, a frantic, desperate lie. I'll just tell them I'm okay. I'll make up a story. Please, Scott, I need to do this. I need to choose. I need to choose my life. He ran a weary hand through his hair, his shoulders slumping. He was caught between his alpha's instinct and his growing, bewildering human feelings for her. He knew he was asking her to give up everything, and the immense burden of that truth weighed on him. Before he could answer, the door burst open. Lena was there, her face grim. Alpha, we have a problem. It's the Blood Moon clan. They've crossed the line. Scott's entire posture changed in an instant. The weary, burdened man was gone, replaced by a fierce, commanding alpha. He looked at Taylor, his eyes burning with a new, urgent purpose. "This isn't over," he said, his voice a low growl. "But right now there are things more important." He turned and strode out the door, Lena close behind. Taylor, confused and frightened, followed them. The news of the Blood Moon clan sent a ripple of fear through the pack. The name was whispered with a kind of grim reverence. Taylor learned they were not like rogues. They were an organized, brutal pack who believed in power through conquest. They were encroaching on territories, hunting without respect for boundaries, and they were a direct threat to the Silver Creek Pack's peaceful existence. For the next 2 days, the entire territory was on high alert. Scott was everywhere at once. He was with the scouts, preparing the defenses, giving orders. He was calm, focused, and completely in control. Taylor watched him from a distance, a knot of fear in her stomach. The man she had seen in the crisis was even more pronounced now. He was a general, a protector, a man who would do anything to keep his people safe. She also saw the immense risk he was taking. He was the first in, the last out. His life was constantly on the line. One evening, unable to bear the tension in the main house, Taylor decided to go for a walk. He needed to think. She needed air. She walked down a winding path she thought was safe, a path Scott had once pointed out as being close to the center of the territory. The silence of the forest was thick with a new, menacing energy. The air was charged not with Scott's power, but with a tension that felt like a coiled spring. She was just about to turn back when she heard a low, guttural growl that was not from a wolf, but from a man. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She looked up and saw a man standing on a ridge above her. He was large, his face a grim, scarred mask. He was a werewolf, but he was not from Scott's pack. She knew it instinctively. He had a different scent, a different energy, a cold, predatory aura that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She took a terrified step back, her mind screaming. She had stumbled into a territorial dispute. She was in the middle of a conflict and she was an easy target. The man smiled, a cruel, mocking curve of his lips. He started to descend the ridge towards her, his movements silent and purposeful. Just as he was about to reach the bottom, a powerful form shot out from the trees. Scott. He was there, a blur of motion, his body a solid wall of muscle. He was in front of her in an instant, a shield between her and the threat. He let out a low, terrifying growl, a sound of pure, unbridled fury that seemed to shake the very trees. It wasn't the kind of growl he had used on her. It was a warning, a threat, a promise of violence. The rival werewolf stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes, dark and menacing, met Scott's. A silent, tense exchange passed between them. The air was thick with it, an unspoken language of power and dominance. The rival looked at her, then back at Scott, a flicker of something that looked like respect in his eyes. Scott didn't move. He stood there, his back to her, his large body completely shielding her from the threat. She was pressed against his back and she could feel the heat radiating from him, the tense coil of his muscles, the steady rhythmic beat of his heart. The scent of pine and rain, once so terrifying, was now the most comforting smell in the world. She felt an overwhelming sense of safety, a profound primal reassurance that no harm could ever come to her as long as he was there. It was a feeling so powerful, so undeniable, it took her breath away. The rival finally gave a short, curt nod and backed away, disappearing into the trees as silently as he had come. Scott stood there for a long moment, his chest heaving. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, a silent guardian. Taylor finally wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, her face pressed against the solid warmth of his back. He was her protector. Not by choice but by instinct. The man she had called a monster, the alpha she had rejected so many times, had just saved her life. He was her wall, her shield. And in that moment she realized with a terrifying clarity that the mate bond was a real living thing, and it was a promise. A promise of protection. A promise of a life she never asked for, but which she was starting to realize might be the only one she could ever truly have. The life she had planned with Mark seemed like a flimsy, paper-thin dream compared to the raw, visceral reality of a man who would face a monster to protect her. Chapter 7. The peace of the Silver Creek pack was gone. The Blood Moon clan, true to their reputation, were not mindless brutes. They were cunning. They used human tools, traps, drones, even old-fashioned binoculars, to scout the territory, and their tactics were designed to spread chaos and fear. They had a singular goal: to challenge Scott's authority and take over his land. The entire pack was on edge, their nerves frayed, their faces grim. Taylor, no longer just a spectator, felt the tension in her bones. The life and death stakes of their world were no longer just a concept. They were her new reality. She watched Scott work, and the man she had called a monster became a general. He was a force of nature, decisive and calm under pressure. He was a leader, and she found herself begrudgingly in awe. One evening, Scott gathered his council around a large map in his office. Taylor, unable to stay away, lingered in the shadows of the doorway. Lena was pointing out a new threat. A large, well-hidden snare they had found on a crucial supply path. The Blood Moon clan was cutting off their resources. "They're using human technology," Lena said, her voice a low growl of frustration. "We can't track them when they're in the air. We can't anticipate these traps." Scott's jaw was set. He was a warrior, a hunter. He knew how to fight with his senses, his strength, his pack. This was a different kind of war. Taylor, without even thinking, stepped forward. "It's a different kind of war," she said, her voice soft but firm. All heads turned to her, their expressions a mix of surprise and suspicion. Even Scott looked at her with a raised brow. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Your advantage is your senses. Your instincts," she explained, her gaze flicking from one face to the next. "Their advantage is technology. They're using it to level the playing field. To beat you, you have to think like them." She walked up to the map, her heart thumping, and pointed to a narrow pass. "This is a choke point. A human would use drones to survey this area, look for weaknesses. You have to anticipate that." She pointed to another area, a thicket of dense trees. "They're not using their noses. They're using their eyes. They'll expect you to go around. You should go through." Scott's golden eyes studied her, a flicker of something she couldn't name in their depths. She was no longer just the human he had claimed. She was a contributor, a strategist. Her human mind, which had felt so useless in this world, was now a weapon. That night, a small patrol went out to secure the main choke point. Scott went with them. The air was heavy with tension. Taylor stayed behind, unable to sleep, her mind filled with the image of him in danger. It was the first time she had truly felt fear for his safety, a fear that was not born from her own captivity, but from a genuine concern for the man. The patrol returned a few hours later, their faces pale but victorious. They had found and disabled a series of traps and had driven off a group of Blood Moon scouts. They had used Taylor's strategy, and it had worked. Scott came back to his office, exhausted. He was alone, and he leaned against the wall, his head in his hands, his body a mix of adrenaline and bone-deep weariness. Taylor, who had been waiting for him, slipped in and closed the door softly. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked up, surprised to see her. A deep, weary sigh escaped his lips. "We're okay. We were lucky." She sat down on the floor in front of him, her gaze on his face. She saw the lines of exhaustion, the dark circles under his eyes. He looked tired, vulnerable. "Why didn't you go after them?" she asked. "You could have taken them on your own, couldn't you?" He looked at her, his expression a mix of bewilderment and pain. "It's not my way, Taylor. I don't fight for sport. I fight to protect my people. This isn't a game." He ran a weary hand through his hair. "I hate this," he confessed, the words so raw and unexpected they caught her off guard. "I hate this endless fighting. I just want I just want peace for my pack. I just want to be with my mate. He looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes was so profound it made her heart ache. I don't know how to do this, he said, his voice low and heavy. I'm an alpha. I can protect my people from any threat. But you are my greatest strength and my greatest weakness. I don't know how to convince you that this is real. I don't know how to make you see that our bond is meant to be a refuge from all of this. I just want you to see me. Taylor felt her own walls, so carefully constructed for weeks, crumble. The man in front of her was not a barbarian. He was a leader, a man with a crushing burden, and a heart that was yearning for a connection she had been stubbornly denying. She had been so focused on what he had taken from her that she had never once considered what he had to give. I do see you, Scott, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I see a man who would do anything to protect his people. I see a man who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. I see you. He was silent, his golden eyes searching her face. He saw her too. He saw her pain, her fear, and the glimmer of a new, bewildering emotion. He saw the shift, the acceptance, the surrender. He reached for her face, his large hand cupping her cheek. His touch was no longer just a spark. It was a flame. It was the electricity she had felt at the wedding, 1,000 times stronger, a current of pure, undeniable connection that flowed through her veins. He leaned in and she didn't pull away. She leaned in too. His lips were soft, surprisingly gentle at first. A question. A hesitant exploration. Then with her answering sigh, the kiss deepened. It wasn't a fight. It was a surrender, a rush of emotion so powerful it took her breath away. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and her hands found their way to his hair, clutching at it. The kiss was a torrent of passion, of release, of a bond that had been held captive for weeks finally being set free. It was a kiss that held all his anger, all his frustration, all his pain, and all his hope. And it was a kiss that held all of her defiance, all of her heartbreak, and all of her newfound terrifying love. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathless. His forehead was pressed against hers, his eyes closed. Taylor, he breathed, his voice raw. She looked at him, her vision blurred with tears of relief and surrender. She had fought him for weeks, hated him with a passion she thought was limitless, and now, in a single moment, she knew that she was lost. She was his. The mate bond, once a terrifying chain, was now a lifeline. She was no longer a prisoner. He was a partner. The life she had planned was a faded photograph, and the life in his arms was a living, breathing reality. She was falling and she was terrified, but for the first time she was no longer fighting the fall. She was embracing it. Chapter 8. The threat of the Blood Moon clan was put to an end. The patrol, bolstered by Taylor's human ingenuity and Scott's fierce leadership, had managed to push the rivals back to their own territory. Scott had sent a clear message. The Silver Creek pack was not an easy target. The victory was a quiet one, a sense of relief settling over the territory like a soft blanket. The tension that had held them all captive was gone, replaced by a grateful calm. Taylor, for her part, felt a quiet pride. She had contributed to their safety, and in a small, profound way she belonged to the victory. The morning after their kiss, the atmosphere between Taylor and Scott was different. It was no longer a battleground of wills, but a fragile, charged quiet. They sat on the porch swing, the sun on their faces, the air filled with a sense of unspoken understanding. Taylor felt a million emotions, but chief among them was a profound sense of guilt. She finally broke the silence. I have to see him, Scott, she said, her voice soft but firm. I have to talk to Mark. Scott's body stiffened, a flash of the old possessiveness flickering in his golden eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a weary understanding. He knew this was a battle he couldn't win with brute force. He had to trust her. Why? He asked, his voice low. Because he deserves to know I'm alive, she explained, the words pouring out of her like a river. He deserves to know I'm safe. And he deserves to know that I'm not coming back. The last words were a physical ache in her chest. He deserves a real goodbye. Not just a ghost. She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. You said the bond is about trust. You have to trust me to do this. I have to go back and get closure to make a real choice. A choice for you, not out of captivity but out of love. The word, spoken aloud for the first time, felt both terrifying and liberating. Scott was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the forest. The concept was so foreign to him. In his world, a mate bond was a finality. There was no need for goodbyes or closure. But he had seen her pain, her guilt, and he had come to understand that her heart, her human heart, worked in a different way. He had to let her go to truly win her. He had to give her the choice so her love would mean something. He let out a long, slow sigh. I'll take you, he said, the words a shock to her system. I'll drop you off in a town nearby. You go, you talk to him, and then I'll be there to pick you up. You'll wait? She asked, her voice thick with surprise. I will be waiting for you, Taylor, he promised, his voice low and firm. Because I know you'll come back. The drive from the Pack territory to the nearest town was a silent, tense affair. Taylor watched as the dense forest gave way to scattered houses, then to suburbs she recognized, and finally to the familiar sights of a small town. The traffic lights, the busy cafes, the people walking their dogs. It was her world, and it felt so impossibly far away. The scent of car exhaust and human perfume was a jarring contrast to the pine and wildness of the Pack lands. Scott pulled over near a small coffee shop, a place she and Mark had frequented. He turned to her, his expression a mix of hope and profound fear. I'll be here in 2 hours. No more. I'll be waiting. Taylor nodded, her heart in her throat. She stepped out of the car and walked into the cafe. Her phone, which had been a useless rectangle for weeks, now had full service. Her thumb hovered over Mark's contact. Her heart ached with a deep, consuming pain. This was a love she had cherished for years, a love that had been so simple and so pure. He had to end it. For him and for herself. She finally called him. He picked up on the second ring, his voice frantic with relief and confusion. She told him to meet her at a quiet park they used to go to. She saw him as she approached, his face etched with worry and exhaustion. He looked at her, his eyes welling up with tears. He ran to her and pulled her into a tight, desperate hug. Taylor. Oh my God, I was so worried. Where have you been? Are you okay? She held him, a sob catching in her throat. He loved him. A part of her would always love him. But it was a different kind of love now. A love for a cherished memory, not a future. She pulled back, her hands on his chest. I'm so sorry, Mark. I'm so sorry. What are you talking about? Taylor, what happened? Who did this? He asked, his voice full of protective fury. She didn't know how to explain it. How could she tell him she had been taken by a werewolf? How could she tell him she had fallen for a man who claimed her as his own? Mark, I can't come home, she said, the words a whisper. He recoiled as if she had struck him. What? Taylor, what are you saying? Is this about him? That man at the wedding? What did he do to you? He didn't do anything, she said, a terrible, heartbreaking lie. He saved me. He showed me a world I never knew existed. I can't go back to the way things were. It's not who I am anymore. Mark's face crumpled. The pain in his eyes was so profound it almost made her change her mind. Taylor, don't say that. We can fix this. Whatever happened, whatever he did, we can fix it. Our life, our future. Our future is gone, Mark, she said, her voice cracking. My heart belongs to someone else now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She leaned in and kissed him on the cheek, a final goodbye to the life she had planned. She turned and walked away, her heart shattering with every step. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She walked back to the car, her feet heavy, her face streaked with tears. She saw Scott waiting for her, his back to the car, his posture tense and expectant. The sight of him, a beacon of strength in this strange, confusing world, was a profound comfort. She stopped in front of him, her chest heaving. He looked at her, his golden eyes searching her face, and he saw everything he needed to see. The tears, the pain, the finality. He didn't ask a single question. He just opened his arms. She walked into his embrace, and it was a homecoming. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she clung to him, her face pressed against his chest. The smell of him, of pine and rain and the wildness of the forest, was the most comforting scent in the world. She wasn't a human in a world of wolves. She was a woman in her mate's arms. "You came back," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I did," she sobbed, her tears soaking his shirt. "I came home." The choice had been made. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of a love that had bloomed in the most impossible of circumstances. She was a woman from the suburbs and he was an alpha from the wild. She had a new life, a new beginning, and a new future in the arms of the man she had once hated, but now finally chose to love. Epilogue. A warm bonfire crackled in the center of the main clearing, its light illuminating the faces of the pack. Taylor sat on a log, her husband's arm draped over her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. It had been years since her life had been ripped from her, years since a wedding dress had become a shroud and a mate bond a prison. Now it was a lifeline. She was no longer just Taylor, the human from the suburbs. She was Taylor Luna of the Silver Creek Pack. And the title, once a terrifying prospect, now felt like an extension of herself. Her heart, once a battlefield, was now full. Life was a blend of two worlds. The wild instincts of the pack and the simple human comforts of her past. She had taught the pack about a few human holidays, much to their amused confusion. One year she had tried to teach the children to go trick-or-treating. They had all, in wolf form, burst out of the woods and scared the living daylights out of a group of unsuspecting campers. Scott, a reluctant Halloween enthusiast, just shook his head and handed out the candy anyway. Their children were a testament to the beautiful, impossible blend. Their son Jamie was 7 with Scott's lithe frame and golden eyes that could see everything. But he had her easy laugh and a love for building with Legos. Their daughter Clara was 5 with a massive brown curls and her mother's determined chin, but she had a wild, playful energy and a deep, intuitive understanding of pack dynamics. She was a natural leader, and her little growls of frustration were both adorable and a little intimidating. Taylor smiled, her gaze drifting to Scott. He was the same man, and yet he was profoundly different. He was still the alpha, a fierce, commanding presence who would face down any threat to protect his people. But he was softer now, more patient, more understanding. Her human heart, with all its complexities, had taught him that strength wasn't just about power, but about vulnerability and choice. He no longer saw her rejection as a threat, but as a testament to the depth of her love. She had chosen him in the end, and that choice meant more than any fated bond ever could. He leaned down, his lips brushing her hair. "What are you thinking about, Luna?" he whispered, his voice a low rumble. "Just everything," she said, her voice soft. "About that first night. About how much I hated you." He let out a low, soft chuckle. "I know," he said, and she could feel the smile against her hair. "You gave me a run for my money. I honestly didn't know what to do with you." "Good," she said. "I wouldn't have had it any other way." Their life was not a fairy tale. There were still dangers in the world, challenges to face. But they faced them together. Taylor, the human planner, became an asset to the pack, helping to organize their patrols, manage their resources, and even teach a few young healers how to use human medicines alongside their own. Her old life, once a ghost that haunted her, was now a tool she used to make their future better. She had a small private place in the main house, a room she had made her own. It was filled with books, an old laptop, and a single faded photograph of Mark on her wedding day. She didn't look at it often, but sometimes when the silence of the night was too much, She would hold it in her hands. The pain was no longer sharp but a dull, gentle ache. He was a part of her story, a part of the girl she used to be. She wished him happiness, wished him a life as full of love as hers had become. She had left him heartbroken, but she had also left him with his future, a future she couldn't share. Her life was here now. Her heart was here. One evening, Scott found her in her private room staring at the old photo. He didn't say anything, just stood in the doorway, a silent, powerful presence. She finally turned, a faint, sad smile on her face. "I had to break his heart to choose mine," she said, her voice a whisper. He came to her, took the photo from her hand and gently placed it face down on the table. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "You did what you had to do," he said, his voice full of a quiet understanding. "You found your way back to me." She looked at him, her gaze meeting his. His golden eyes, once a symbol of her captivity, were now a beacon of her home. The journey had been long, terrifying, and heartbreaking. She had been ripped from her life, forced to confront a world she never knew existed, and made to choose between her past and a destiny she never wanted. But she had made her choice, and it had been the right one. She was no longer a captive. She was no longer a prisoner. She was the Luna. She was the mate of a powerful alpha. She was a mother, a partner, a leader. She was Taylor, a woman who had once been an unclaimed mate, but was now finally and completely home. If you were in Taylor's shoes, would you choose the life you planned, or the destiny you were given? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more emotional paranormal romance stories.